Right, good afternoon, students.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon. Right. So in the last class, I think we stopped at genetic counseling. Am I right? So in this class, we are going to begin with the genetic screening part. So as part of the genetic counseling, we learned that so when someone sees indication about any genetic problem in a given family, either because there was some family history, or they probably got married within the blood relationship, or they had some tests done and the test indicated that there could be a genetic problem. So like that, if there is an indication of any problem that could affect them or that could affect their baby, they would approach a trained personnel who would actually help them go through the concept, explain them by taking their family history, and then explain the risk factor associated with that disease and for them or for their children. So they get counseled for that. And if needed, some testing is done, right? We talked about that. So what type of testing is done and when is the screening is normally done? Let's have a look at the genetic screening process and when does that get happen. So I'm sharing this screen with you. Right. So by definition, what is genetic screening? So basically it is looking for any abnormality. Okay, any abnormality. This is to confirm, because counseling is a process where someone using the available information, discusses with the couple, correct? So screening is where identifying that problem. We screen, we look for that problem is what is screening. Do you see the difference? Counseling is helping, analyzing, discussing the possibilities, issues, risks. Screening is doing the test to identify that, to find it. So genetic screening can be a search in apparently normal population for individual with abnormal genes. Okay, basically identifying. So this is in this scenario, screening is looking for those people, looking for them who have issue with who have abnormal genes, could be recessive genes or genes with mutations that can cause rare disorders. So that is what is called genetic screening. In a very simple sense, screening means looking for something. Genetic means looking for genetic abnormalities, like all those we discussed in chromosomal aberrations, plus mutations, hemophilia, sickle cell anemia, cystic fibrosis, those type of diseases.
So do they look for all the since we have 3 billion genes? So do they look for all the genes or just the 0.01% of which is variant?
No. See, I don't think they would look into the variants. Here, what exactly happens is we know what we are looking for. We don't randomly look for anything. So, for example, we know, like for example, in the case of breast cancer, I was mentioning to you, there is something called BRCA1 gene. If there is history in the family or someone is complaining about the symptoms of that cancer, you would look only for that sequence. Okay, we have depending on the method, either we have something called probes. Probe is something that is complementary to what we are looking for. So meaning we know what we are searching for. So look for that sequence by using a probe or by using what is called a PCR, multiplication or amplification method. Okay, so you look for what you want. So it's not like completely looking for every possible problem. No, that doesn't help. That confuses you more than what you would learn from such a process. Okay, so basically screening is a process where you identify the abnormalities in genes, and most likely you're looking for a specific problem that you are predicting, because you get some clues, right? By talking to those people, you use that. And especially those problems that increase the risk in them or increase the risk in the children. Okay. So how is it done and when is it done? At what stages? What are the different types of genetic screenings are done? Okay, for each of these topics, you need to know what information to be covered. That is very, very important. Like, so we learned that screening can be done, but at what stages screening is done and what methods are being used for genetic screening. This is what we need to learn here. So types are the steps or stages where genetic screening is done. I'll first begin with prenatal diagnosis. So prenatal. So before baby is born, okay, diagnosis that happens on the baby that is growing in mother's womb. So this is called prenatal. Before baby is born, prenatal diagnosis. Second one is newborn screening. So after baby is born. So before baby is born and after baby is born. Next, carrier identification. So you can even do before these two. Carriers, if there is a potential to have children with that feature, you can already test the parents, correct? Or forensic screening, paternity testing, those type of things can also be done. Okay, that forensic screening, paternity testing we'll discuss in unit 12. But our focus will be mostly on these things: prenatal diagnosis, newborn screening, and carrier identification. Okay, let's look at them a bit in detail, what they are and how is it done, how in each stage the screening process is done. So prenatal screening test, this is something that probably you're all familiar about or you might have heard about. If someone carrying a baby, normally doctors recommend them at certain stages during their pregnancy to get certain tests done. Okay, they may not directly look for genetic problems, they would look for any abnormality that is visible. Can you tell me what exactly, what type of test are they doing here?
Looking for baby's heartbeat or proper growth.
Right, something that they would normally do is, yes, for sure, they look for baby's heartbeat. How is it beating? Okay, but what are they doing here in this image? What are they seeing here? They're, they're trying to see something in the screen and they actually have a probe here. What type of test is this?
Ultrasound.
Echo.
Oh, yeah.
Ultrasound.
Ultrasound. It is ultrasound. So echolation. So sound, echo of sound, that is what they're looking for. So here basically they are seeing, they are testing they're using ultrasound to see any visible abnormalities in the baby. So baby will be visible here and you can see whether spinal cord is normally formed or not. They cannot identify the genetic problems here yet, but they'll identify the features, abnormalities in baby's growth, size of the head, for example, or any abnormalities in the facial structure. They would maybe look for something like in the spinal cord, because some genetic problems would lead to spinal cord problems. So those type of things they would look for. So mainly to assess the risk of the unborn baby with neural tubal defects or birth defects, okay, which could be because of the chromosomal abnormalities. So further investigation has to be done if ultrasound shows some abnormalities. And this is being done when baby is in the mother's womb. Okay, so this is what happens in ultrasound. So ultrasound can happen after fertilization, few weeks after fertilization, but normally it is recommended in the 5th month, when they are in the 5th month of the pregnancy. Okay, I'm not sure if you are able to see the baby here. Okay, just have a look at that. Give me 1 second. I'll mute myself for 1 minute. Sorry guys, yeah. So what do you notice in the image here? So can you see the baby here? Are you able to recognize the baby? Baby's head here, right? And nose, mouth, and spinal cord. This piece is spinal cord. So it gives a very good resolution Of course, good in the sense, easy enough to identify certain problems, certain gross problems, that are big problems. Okay, and non-invasive, so no damage to the baby. Normally, they just put a probe, as we have seen in the previous image, and collect the data of sound that is equalated or that is reverted from by after falling on the baby. So anatomical abnormalities in the anatomy of the baby structure, neural tube defects, or other things like if there is a little less fluid of amniotic fluid, size of the baby, some such abnormalities could be identified here. Okay, so but as I said, this is just the beginning. It would indicate if there is any specific problem there, but what caused it, if it is because of the genetic problems, that needs to be identified. But this is what normally done during the prenatal screening process. So ultrasound is done, mainly looking for the anatomical changes. Something that you can easily connect to is the neural tube defects in the nervous system. Okay, spinal cord.
How many weeks is it suggested, sir? After how many weeks? During.
So, unless if there is an indication of a problem, they do it 5th month. Okay, in India, it depends on the country to country. I've seen that in India they do very frequently. Okay, depending on the problem. But in other countries, I have seen they normally do it at the 5th month. If needed, they repeat one more time. Otherwise, they don't recommend it being done unless it is necessary. But the 5th month is very standard. Okay. So, but of course, ultrasound cannot give us idea about the genetic problem. So what needs to be done to identify the genetic problems? We were briefly talking about these things. Some sample of the baby has to be taken out. Remember this. Specific details you may forget here. Okay, but I'll explain you two most common sampling that happens here. But the goal is this: we want to know if baby is suffering from a genetic problem, and we want to specifically identify the problem. So somehow we have to get access to the baby's DNA. So baby sample has to be taken. And the most common methods here is one is called amniocentesis. I think I was briefly talking to yesterday in the case study. Amniocentesis it is called. Okay, meaning collecting amniotic fluid. Amniotic fluid is the fluid in which the baby is actually float in mother's womb. So amniocentesis is the collection of baby's DNA material from that fluid. Amniocentesis it is called. I'll show you that, but for now just have a look at it. I'll show you two methods. Okay, we have two specific methods here. We will have a look at that, but for now. So what do? They somehow collect the DNA, and one common method is amniocentesis. And then they have access to the DNA. They take the DNA, they analyze the DNA, they analyze the chromosomes here for any problem such as Down syndrome. If baby shows trisomy, we have seen karyotype, right? We have seen karyotypes in the chromosome abnormalities. How do they prepare karyotype? By taking the cells of the baby. How do you get access to the baby cells in the prenatal testing? It has to be collected from the mother's womb, which adds certain amount of risk. Correct? So then based on something like karyotyping, or we have more advanced methods that we are going to learn in 9.1. So Down syndrome, looking for trisomy 13, trisomy 18, Fragile X syndrome. So what is Fragile X syndrome? What does it show? What event do we look for in Fragile X? Do you remember where did we learn about Fragile X? This is an example for
Duplication.
duplication event. Correct? 15, chromosome 15 we talked about, and Fragile X we talked about, the duplication. Deletion
Mutation in
is
X chromosome.
This is in X chromosome, yes. Fragile X is in X chromosome. We took two examples, one in chromosome 15, one in X chromosome. Try to chat for deletion, and we learned about the various cancers in translocation. Leukemia, mainly CML, chronic myeloid leukemia. Okay, so like that we can look for specific chromosomal abnormalities or genetic abnormalities, neural tube defects. Okay, right. So this is part of the genetic diagnosis. After ultrasound, if needed, they would do these type of tests. So now let's see how do these tests work. I'm going to specifically talk to you about the test that they conduct here. These are the two tests that we are going to talk about. One is called chorionic villus sampling. Chorionic villus sampling and amniocentesis. Amniocentesis, taking the amniotic fluid. You see this fluid in blue color here. The baby is kind of bathing in this fluid, and this fluid is collected like this. So basically they put a needle through the mother's womb and collect the fluid like this. So definitely it adds some amount of risk to the baby, right? So this is one method. Second method is, do you see the baby is actually covered by several layers? So to the placenta of the mother, baby is connected, right? The placenta contains certain layers, and one of them is called chorionic villi, chorionic villus. So they carry the blood vessels from the mother's placenta to the baby's umbilical cord. So this tissue is taken. This portion is actually piece of that is taken. Okay, as you see here, they put a kind something like a catheter into this. This would collect a piece of this region, and this also is from which the baby is made. So these tissues will actually match with the baby's DNA. So they would get access to this. This is called chorionic villi, and this is called amniotic fluid. So collecting amniotic fluid for testing is amniocentesis, and collecting chorionic villus is chorionic villus sampling. Okay. The next image will show you the details, briefly details about this process. Okay, I don't think, I haven't seen questions which ask you to explain this. This is for your understanding. So depending on the demand, you can actually decide how much to write for that. So briefly, this is what happens. There is suggestible time, which varies. I think the previous image to this image, a slight variation, but about 14 to 16 weeks time we are talking about. Okay, about fourth month, for example, around fourth month is when it is suggested to do this testing. Before that, it may cause more damage to the child, and after that as well. So around 15 to 18 weeks or 14 to 16 weeks time is when it is recommended. So they would basically put a needle, as you see here. Needle can be placed like this while watching using ultrasound. So ultrasound screen, on the screen they can see where the needle is going. So they are guided by the ultrasound process. They put the needle here and collect the sample. And this sample will be collected and will be put through the, I think they probably have to grow these cells that they would collect in the laboratory for some time. Okay, and then analysis has to be done. Genetic analysis, DNA analysis, so chromosomal analysis. Nowadays, you can even sequence their DNA. Or you can look for only specific regions instead of sequencing complete DNA. Look for whether the baby carries any specific mutation. Or baby perform karyotyping to check if baby carries any chromosomal abnormalities, numerical abnormalities, structural abnormality. So that analysis is done on that. Okay, this is logical and you don't have to explain it too technically here. Okay, just explain the process. So what is amniocentesis? So why are they collecting amniotic fluid? what do they do with the amniotic fluid? And the whole goal, as I was telling you, to identify if there is a specific genetic problem in the baby. So basically, instead of poking the baby, they're collecting sample connected to the baby here. Because baby cells, fetal cells seems to be found in the amniotic fluid. So that is why instead of causing damage directly to the baby, they do this type of tests. A lot of studies have been done on this, so this has become a standard procedure in this case. Okay. So similarly, chorionic villi sample, same thing. Instead of amniocentesis, you actually talk about chorionic villus sampling. So ultrasound guided, instead of collecting amniotic fluid, you are collecting this portion here, this hairy-like structure that you see around the baby. So this is called chorionic layer. Okay, and they would collect a small portion of that. Small section of the chorion is suctioned off, meaning it is pulled off through the catheter. Catheter is a tube like this. And here it is not a needle, right? They don't put it like that. They basically put it through the vagina like this and collect the sample again while guided through the ultrasound here. And this suctioned chorionic sample will have enough cells in them. So basically, this is it avoids the processing time, unlike with the amniotic fluid. Otherwise, rest of the things is common. Once they get access to the chromosomes, analyze the chromosome, analyze the DNA. If at all they have to do some other test, biochemical test, they would do this on this sample. So basically, they would identify the problem using either chorionic villi sampling or amniocentesis. So is it easy enough for you to remember? Okay, only I think terms that you have to by heart is amniocentesis and chorionic villi. That's it. Otherwise, as per the image, as you can clearly see, it is not that difficult, and you know what we are expecting. So if you can draw something like this as a flow chart, that will be easier for you to explain. But of course, also it adds the risk. So briefly, I'll tell you what type of risk and when is the risk is seen with respect to amniocentesis and chorionic villi sampling. So what are the benefits of such testing? They can help examine the baby's chromosomes. Baby's chromosomes can be obtained and problem can be identified. So it is definitely a diagnostic tool. Provides us a clear answer whether baby has a problem of any specific problem and if anything needs to be done for that. And also one can perform other genetic tests in this process. But the problems here, so these are the advantages. Just make a note of the advantages. So this is a specific diagnostic tool, provides a clear answer. Okay. And also other genetic conditions, not just the conditions that you are looking for, but if you're suspecting something else, other genetic conditions can also be identified. Limitations, these are invasive procedures. Unlike the ultrasound here, some amount of invasion, some amount of damage can happen in the process, pain, can happen to the mother. Okay, and the risk of miscarriage. This also has amount of risk for miscarriage. So, for example, chorionic villi sample will have about 1 in 100 to 1 in 200 miscarriages. 1 out of 100 to 200 tests can have miscarriage because of the test itself. So this is not recommended just like that. It is only done when essential, when it is found to be essential or absolutely needed. Amniocentesis has slightly lower risk, 1 in 200 to 1 in 500 miscarriages are seen. And as I was telling you, there are specific time periods when it is recommended. This may vary from country to country, okay, source to source, but few weeks. So about 4th month for chorionic villi sampling. Okay. And if it is further, it needs to be done, preferably amniocentesis. Okay, right. So there are other methods as well, like fetal sorting, cell sorting it is called. So from maternal bloodstream, sometimes they can even collect the blood because few blood components seems to be present in that blood vessels. They can even collect that. So that is a bit less invasive because you're not going close to the baby. So that will avoid some of the issue. You don't have to mention this, just mention about amniocentesis and CVS. And pre-implantation genetics sometimes we hear. So let's say in IVF technology, in vitro fertilization technology, if they have performed fertilization in the laboratory, right? IVF technology, I'm assuming that you are familiar about, right? They would collect sperms and eggs in the laboratory and fertilize them in a test tube. That is what's called test tube baby, right? So fertilize in the laboratory and will allow it to become a zygote and embryo. So this is done outside the womb. And before they place the embryo into the mother's womb, they sometimes they have to make tests, certain analysis has to be done. So this is called pre-implantation testing, meaning before implanting the embryo during IVF technology, this is done. So such tests are also done. So when babies are born in fertility clinics, such tests are done as part of the pre-implantation diagnosis. Okay, this is also a term that you can mention as part of the prenatal diagnosis, what we just talked about, plus pre-implantation diagnosis. Okay, especially if embryo has some health issues, they can eliminate them and instead use the healthy tissues. Because imagine if there is a risk factor in the old mother. So maternal age can increase the chromosomal abnormality that we talked about. If they go through IVF, but they have to make sure that the baby is not carrying any such problems, specific and rare problem, and ensure that the embryo is healthy. That can be done in the pre-implantation genetics. Okay, next, postnatal testing or postnatal screening. After baby is born, this is also called newborn screening. Newborn screening. Newborn screening. First, we'll talk about newborn screening. So this is a very simple procedure. So commonly done in the other developed countries. So what do? Something called heel prick. Heel. The heel region that you see here, as soon as the baby is born, they prick with the needle and collect some blood. And basically they squeeze some blood from the baby's feet by pricking it with a needle. A few drops of the blood are taken from the baby's heel and blotted, meaning they place it on a paper. So they have a blot, a thick sheet they normally carry. They put it on the baby. They collect the blood basically on this, which has some special material on that. And after that, they will send it to the laboratory for newborn screening. So this is a very common test. As you see, they're squeezing here. Baby's blood is squeezed like that and collect enough samples and send it to the screening process. And again, what we have learned before, they would look for some metabolic disorders. if there is any excess amount of certain, remember we're talking about phenylketonuria, metabolic disorders, metabolic syndromes. They can identify by looking at the presence of certain amino acids. Okay, metabolic disorders, I think in USA, they recommend them to look for metabolic disorders. And if someone actually have diabetes, gestational diabetes, for example, so some of these components can be checked here. So newborn screening is screening done after the baby is born and right after the baby is born. And blood testing is one such things that we are seeing here. Okay, this is just something I collected from a US website. What do they do? Children should be screened shortly after 24 hours of being born. It helps keep your baby healthy through heel stick hearing test, pulse oximetry. They look for oxygen levels, hearing test they do, and also the method that I was just talking to you. This is done. So in US, it is common that 1 in 300 babies show some or the other genetic problem in newborn screening, or some are the other non-genetic problems, but the problems that they can actually take care of. Okay, this is a common theme, and this is called newborn screening. Mostly, as I was telling you, hearing, vision, and oxygen levels and genetic problems are usually done. The last one is the carrier testing. Carrier testing. So carriers, we already know, right? Who are carriers? Who are called as carriers?
They are the heterozygous dominant.
For a homozygous recessive condition, a condition where presence of two defective alleles is required, in those cases, if each parent or one of the parent carries one mutant allele, they may not express the problem, but they're carriers. What is the benefit of checking for carriers? Shweta? What is the benefit of checking for carriers? Is there any benefit of knowing, because anyway they're not getting affected? What is the point in checking for the presence of that mutation in them?
In future, some risk, like we can help them in future, some risk occurs due to.
Basically, risk for the future we can identify.
Yes,
If
sir.
this mutant allele, with this couple in this particular example, the red colored ones that you notice here, so they actually have mutation in both the parents. They look normal, but they both carry the mutant version. So children can be affected. So 25% of the children, when these blue colored ones come together, as we learned in the Mendelian process, so babies, 25% of the babies are normal and 50% of the babies can be carriers. So 50% either this meets with this one or this red one meets with the blue one. 50% of chance of carriers, and 25% of the times both red ones, both mutant ones come together affecting the baby. So genetic counselors can tell them that 25% of the chance that their baby can have the genetic problem. So carrier screening, once they identify this problem, they can predict the future risk for the babies. How is it done? So same thing, blood sample, karyotyping, biochemical tests, or even pedigrees that we are going to learn about them in unit 9.1. So pedigrees, they can explain this. So this is called carrier screening.
Sir, in the newborn screening, uh, after the baby is born, so decision making takes place at that point of time as well if they find any, I mean, abnormality.
Come again?
I'm asking. So the decision making, whether to keep the baby, can happen in the newborn screening as well. or do they just fix the issues?
What decisions can they take once the baby is born? So decisions can only be made after prenatal screening or carrier screening. So let's say these couple found out that baby has 25% of chance and it is not treatable problem. They can decide to have abortion. They can decide to abort the baby. Prenatal screening also depending on what time period, because it is not allowed to have, because only in certain months this is recommended. After that, I think recently Indian laws talk about, I think, 22 weeks. So matching with the chorionic villi sampling or amniocentesis that we talked about, okay, about 22 weeks or so, and that too with the permission of multiple doctors, it is allowed. Otherwise, it is not allowed. So after baby is born, only thing is they can prepare and they look for those problems and manage the problem by frequently visiting the specialists. That is what they can do in the newborn screening. Or let's say that certain foods have to be handled, like phenylketonuria, excuse me. So high amount of protein food is not given. Certain amino acids are actually reduced. So they can manage the problem. That is what happens in after newborn screening. But in other cases, prenatal carrier screening, they can make the decision not to have the baby. Okay, right. So this is about genetic screening. Is this concept clear to you? So in genetic screening, what did we learn? So in this process, we learned about what is genetic screening, and in how is genetic screening done. What are the different types of genetic screening we learned about? So genetic screening refers to the screening or looking for the genetic problem either in the couple or in the baby before or after birth. That is what we learned here. So prenatal, postnatal or newborn, and carrier identification we talked about. Even forensic screening or paternity testing can be done, which we'll discuss in the unit 12. Okay. So prenatal, before baby is born, beginning with ultrasound, and ultrasound will give idea about the anatomical abnormalities, and then specific problems can be identified by collecting baby's sample. Amniocentesis, chorionic villi sampling that we talked about, chromosomal abnormalities, genetic abnormalities can be identified from that. Okay, similarly, pre-implantation genetics. Before embryo is implanted into the mother in the fertility clinics through IVF technology, pre-implantation analysis is done. Okay, so we also briefly talked about what is chorionic villi and what is amniocentesis and how is it done. We talked about that, and the idea is here to collect the sample of the baby, so we have access to the baby's DNA or baby's chromosomes. So same thing with this, and there are some risks associated with that. Invasive procedure and miscarriages are possible because of this type of invasive tests. Cell sorting or fetal cell sorting through the collection of baby's particles in the blood vessels is also done, which is less invasive. Okay, so postnatal, talked about newborn screening and carrier testing. Carrier testing is done even before that. So newborn screening, collection of the blood like this with the heel prick, and also looking for any hearing problems or oxygen levels and so on. And US, many states actually they recommend doing this. I don't think this, except for hearing test and this type of screening, I don't think in India they look for any metabolic syndromes or disorders. Okay, it is not necessary because of the lower incidence rate and also lack of facilities in many such places. Okay, and carrier testing. So looking for a recessive condition, a heterozygous condition in a genetic disease that gets expressed in the homozygous recessive condition. So we can predict the percentage of chance of risk, and informed decisions can be made on this. How is it done? This can be done again by taking samples of the parents. Their blood sample can be done, chromosome analysis can be done, or biochemistry, looking for the abnormal building of the amino acids, and those things can be done, or pedigree charts, family histories. We are going to learn and we are going to work on various conditions of pedigree charts in 9.1. Okay, right.
So
yes.
Can you repeat the carrier definition that you just gave a while ago?
Right. So carrier is the heterozygous condition. Carrier is an individual showing heterozygous condition, for heterozygous condition for a rare recessive disorder, a rare recessive disorder, a rare recessive disorder that causes disease in homozygous condition, that causes disease in homozygous condition. That causes disease in homozygous condition. Okay, so they basically they carry the defective allele but don't show the problem. But future generations can have the problem. Okay, so carrier means they're carrying the problem, they're carrying the mutation with them. I've made a brief notes on this. I'm going to provide you on that. So what is genetic testing? Several methods of genetic tests, molecular tests. So we'll learn about some of these in DNA technology. PCR, there is a tool which can amplify DNA and in the process identify if there is a problem. So molecular tests, in the exam, they're repeatedly asking this now. Molecular anthropology, if they say, you have to briefly mention about this. We're going to talk about that test, okay, in another unit. So molecular genetic tests, they are called. So specific, this is more specific testing that gets done here, okay. It's called PCR tests or genetic tests. And chromosome analysis like karyotyping we talked about. Biochemical test means looking for the proteins and abnormal levels of certain compounds in the blood. Okay, newborn screening, diagnostic testing, carrier testing, prenatal testing, pre-implantation testing. I have briefly explained about that. So the information we discussed along with this, you should be able to explain if something being asked related to the genetic screening. But this is not something that is usually asked in the exam, but be familiar, we don't know. If you analyze the paper that had come yesterday, you can definitely see that UPSC is making it with little bit difficult. The questions, of course, are a bit predictable, but this exam we have seen that they have given in combinations with socio-cultural part where you cannot avoid any of these things. You have to answer, you have to prepare all those parts. So less choice is given by identifying better combinations. Archaeology, physical anthropology, socio, you have no way to avoid any of those components. Some questions are straightforward, but some questions are twisted and out of the box questions are also asked. So best part is don't leave anything in the syllabus, understand what needs to be written, and not only the questions, if you conceptually learn, even the question is phrased differently or a different, it is asked in different context, you will be able to explain it. So I don't think UPSC will let people to just by heart or mug up questions repeatedly and focus on it. I think go with concepts. So we are learning what are chromosomal problems, what are the examples, what are the issues, how do we fix those problems, meaning we cannot fix the problem, how do we manage the problems? Okay, and then we are learning about genetic counseling related to them, genetic screening related to them. So in any context they ask this, I think you will be able to explain that. So conceptually go with that. Okay, right. So next we are going to move on to the other parts in 9.4D. We finished talking about genetic counseling, genetic screening. So we have next we'll talk about genomic studies and gene mapping. So we're going to talk about genomic studies and gene mapping. So first we'll start with gene mapping techniques.
Sir, one question. Like normally in the test, what we used to do is, in the set of questions that are already been asked, we prepare answers for it. Even with the understanding, we prepare answer for it, and if that sort of question is asked, we write it.
Right.
So if any dynamics is coming, so that won't work.
Correct. So that won't work. So for that, being able to understand the scope of each topic. So what is this topic? Like for example, at the end of these classes on 9.4, you need to know, starting with what are chromosomes, different types of chromosomes, what are the abnormalities associated with them. And in real life, if those problems happen, what is being done? Are there genetic counselors? Is a testing done? What type of testings are done? You get a broad picture along with the specific details. Correct? So when you add this to the socio-cultural context, for example, They asked about how something like, they didn't specify it, but pandemics. So infections, how are they affecting the tribal populations, they asked. Indigenous populations, they asked. So there are some vulnerabilities that these tribal populations have, and they don't have good awareness. They don't access the advanced facilities for treatments, and they live very closely to each other. They have certain belief systems. So what happens? The infection can easily spread, and given that they actually there within them, their genetic pool is actually very limited. So what happens that, like in Amish populations, the problems will continue to trouble them for generations to come. Correct? So you have to think, you have to be able to connect them instead of just talking about, okay, by heart something like a genetic testing, or right amino synthesis, right chorionic villus sampling, without really understanding what it is and how is it done. And also people, because of the stress, tend to forget. In the exam they assume that they have written well, but they forget because they don't make connections. So I think we are trying to address those problems in these classes. Now you may have to repeatedly check for the terms, but you know the concept. The question is asked slightly differently, then you'll be able to answer it. And but how do you know what dimensions they ask? That is a difficult and challenging part. I don't think, sometimes when we set up the paper for the practice, I don't want to give a question that is out of the box and that may not come in the exam. That is where we get stuck sometimes. I can bring many different questions. Okay, but the problem is, if that is not relevant to the exam, students don't like to write those answers. The other day for the test series, I was giving them immunogenetics that we are going to learn in the next process. Immunogenetics is something that students usually find it very difficult, and they avoid writing that answer. But with respect to the COVID-19, they may ask you questions related to the immunodiagnostics, immunogenetics component. That is very important for us to learn. Right? So, but keep in mind, yes, they're not asking exactly the same context, but majority of the questions are still coming. Even in the last paper, there are several straightforward questions. Short notes, most of them are actually predictable. Senescence, for example, gender drift, for example, is straightforward. They only have so much room to ask different questions. So you'll be all right. But keep that in mind, and for each topic, try to analyze and see what context the question is coming. In the current scenario, do you expect anything like COVID scenario, for example, tribal related issues, for example, ethical problems with genetic engineering, they asked, ethical issues connected to genetic engineering. Focus on those dimensions. In the past papers, you have not seen it, so students don't study, don't prepare for that. But when we talk about DNA technology and medicine, especially when we talk about CRISPR-Cas9 genome editing technology, I'm going to give you some idea on ethical issues related to that as well. Okay, so we'll actually focus broadly on these topics. And the student who attempted this exam, also from test series, also from my classes, he was very happy the way he could answer, and he was happy because many students complained the questions were not very standard, they could not answer them, but he was happy because he could do that. But keep this in mind. Okay, you have to be conscious about this when you are preparing for the exam. Right. So yes, gene mapping next we'll talk about. So what is gene mapping? So what is a map of a gene? What is a Google map? What do you see in Google map? Google Maps.
Countries, streets, rivers, water bodies, landmarks.
Right, right. So basically they identify the location. So they identify the location of individuals, houses, streams, all sorts of things, right? Physical location of something can be identified on the Google map. Then what do you identify on the gene map?
Position of genes.
Map of genes, position of genes, specific location of genes in the context of several genes. That is what is a gene map. So gene map is a graphical description of the location of genes on the genome of an organism or on the chromosomes of an organism. So it is identifying location of genes on the chromosomes is what is called a gene map. or spatial arrangement of genes on chromosomes. If you want to write something more briefer, spatial arrangement of genes on chromosome is called a gene map. Okay. Now the question is, how do you create a gene map? Can you guess? If you want to somehow find out location or a position of genes on a chromosome, how do you find it? Just guessing game. Okay, I don't expect that you should know about this. Just guess. Let's see if we can make it easy, because the techniques that we are going to learn are slightly complex.
There should be an index.
There should be an index. Can you elaborate on that? What do you mean by index here? What type of index?
Like specific order should be there for a particular gene.
Right.
The
They
arrangement.
are in some order. I think there probably there is a fixed order for the. How do you find that order? So A, B, C, D. Let's say that alphabets are given, but alphabets are put like a puzzle. Alphabets are put in certain order. How do you know? Because we cannot see it, right? You cannot open a person's cell and look for the order. So what do you do to identify that order? So you have to plan something really cleverly to identify the order. That is a big challenge.
I'm just guessing. So
Yeah.
there can be an alternate sequencing, like if a corresponding number or variable, or let's say if we have B or C, let's say against C we can have 3. Instead of C we can have 3. So anytime next time if we see 3, so it means that we have a C there. So it's like I'm thinking wild, but I don't know.
Some sort of. Okay. Fine. Yes, Vishal and Shweta.
Karyotyping. We used it for counting the chromosomes, like or
The problem with karyotyping is a poor resolution. Karyotyping only tells us about the broad or bigger problems. A piece of the chromosome is missing, right? Or there is any translocation issue, or a chromosome is extra. Big problems we can identify. But here we're talking about position of a gene. Gene is a very small dot. It's like locating your home on the Google map. Imagine Google map has a very bad resolution. Can you do that?
So I think maybe in one of our concepts we talked about some kind of markers.
Very good. Yeah. So what do you do with the markers? You're absolutely right. Marker is one method. So what do you do with the markers? What do markers tell?
Well, so I am connecting with the length segment length markers.
Restriction, fragment
Restriction,
length,
markers. So probably they will tell the length of the sequencer.
Correct. That is one method that we are going to talk about. Okay. But yes, I must admit that the methods that we are going to learn here are a bit complex. But this is what I would do if I'm a student. Now I told you gene map is identifying the location. Now we want to connect how a given method or a method that we are discussing helps us identify the position of a gene. That's it. Okay. And in the exam, if you will be able to write, and I know that this is a bit complex, and by using a couple of sources, I've also given original sources to you. I have explained in steps what needs to be done, but understand the essence of this topic. Once you understand the essence of the topic, this complex concept can be identified. And I have seen once this question has been being asked, give the give the mapping methods, gene mapping methods. Okay, right. So we're going to learn about how this is done. How do you identify the location of a gene? So I think I'll come back to the importance of this. Okay. So I think we'll start with the importance first. So first of all, why do we need to do gene mapping? What is the use of gene mapping? So I think you can guess instead of guess. What do you think? Why do we need gene mapping? Come up with some ideas. This is very important. This process I think is very valuable, and this which normally happens in the offline classes, but because of the system that we have, we would like to mimic that here. So what is the use of knowing the location of a gene?
So it might help to detect the disorders.
Perfect. Diagnosis. Okay. So this could be used as a good diagnostic tool. Very good.
And the paternal tests.
So screening. Okay. So screening, diagnosis. What would they lead to? Screening and testing would lead to treatment or decision making. Correct. Okay. Screening for big populations for any specific problems or recessive disorders. Correct. So this is the core idea. Yes, you're absolutely right. So gene map provides, as I was talking about, anatomy of the human genome. It provides you the structure, how many genes are present and where are they present. It's like Google map. So imagine you are going to a place where you're not aware about, but you spend few minutes with the Google map, you get familiarized, you'll be comfortable in going around, in moving around, right? So you can go from one gene to another gene, meaning one house to another house. So like that, you can easily navigate yourself. So this picture of human genome can be obtained with gene mapping. Next, it is a prerequisite for understanding the function of the genome. Gene structure, or in this case, location of the gene, can help us understand its function as well. It can guide us. So why is this particular gene is present in this position? Why is it present next to this gene? So we get the idea of its function in the context of other genes. So this would help us understand the function of human genome. And because of this, what happens, scientists or doctors can identify the location of genes that cause problems to us. Disease causing genes, lethal genes we talked about. So those type of genes can be identified. Their positions can be identified, and diagnostics can be planned based on that. So if some people have abnormal version of them or abnormal situation like translocation, in translocation, what happens? The gene position will be switched, correct? So you can find that heterogeneity in a given individual's genome. Okay, so lack of that homogeneity or lack of that standard positioning of that. Okay, so can be identified. So abnormality with respect to the positioning of the gene can be identified, especially in connection with the genetic diseases. You can ignore the linkage component. I'll explain that in the method. First method, you'll understand what this exactly it means. But these are sufficient and help developing new approaches, new ways of diagnostics, treatment, prevention. So this can guide us into those directions. Okay. Right. So does it make sense? Do you understand the need, importance of genetic mapping? So these aspects are important. If you're learning something, ask these basic questions. Why are we learning about it? Why is it in anthropology? What is the use of it? And then technically, how is it done? So for human welfare in physical anthropology, that we are learning because these are the ways that you use, these are techniques or technological intervention you use to understand the population and prevent and ensure that population health is actually maintained through technical intervention. Okay, right. Next, how is it done? Now the question is, how are gene mapping, how are gene maps created? There are different types of genetic maps. First, we'll start with the linkage map. This is one of the well standard and traditional genetic mapping method. This is called a linkage map. Okay, before explaining what is linkage map, a brief background to that. A geneticist, not sure if you heard about this person, Thomas Hunt Morgan, or T.H. Morgan, is very, very popular. He is one of the founders in genetics. Like after Gregor Mendel, in the next few decades in the 20th century, so 1900s, early 1900s, Thomas Hunt Morgan, or Morgan simply we call, mutations in Drosophila. He had done several studies. Today, our understanding had been built because of someone like Thomas Morgan. Okay, his student called Sturtevant. He has one of his very favorite student, a very bright student called Alfred Sturtevant. Okay, so he actually came up with the idea of mapping, genetic mapping. So the scientists are those people who, based on the knowledge they have and they know what problems that we are trying to address, they come up with the logical method to find the solution or to find a method. So scientists usually try their ideas. So he actually was thinking about how can we identify the order of genes, and then it struck to him that we can use recombination process. Recombination process, crossing over. So what is recombination? We talked about recombination, right? 1.7 in the exam point of view is not important, but to understand something like gene mapping, unless you know about recombination, you cannot do much. So what is recombination? Recombination is, we were talking in the last class as well. So we have homologous chromosomes, exchange of genetic information, exchange of genetic fragments between them is recombination, correct? So he thought about utilizing recombination for constructing a genetic map. Okay, and such a genetic map is called a linkage map. It is called a linkage map. I'll explain you what is a linkage map. It's a genetic map or a linkage map to identify the relative positions, of a genes on chromosomes. Okay, I'll explain you. There are good images for you to follow this. So he thought, Sturtevant actually thought that genes are like beads on a necklace. So they are present one after other, maybe with spacing in between. But there must be some order to these genes. Correct? This is what Sturtevant talked about. And he said, if you learn about how frequently they undergo recombination, how frequently these genes undergo recombination in relative to each other, then he said we can find the order of it. There is one nice image which explains what I'm talking about. So I'll show you the image and I'll show you when something actually shows more recombination and when something shows less recombination. So what is the connection between distance between genes and the recombination frequency is what he used. So by calculating recombination frequency, one can predict the order of genes and in relationship with each other. Okay, let's see the connection. Let me show you that image and explain you how recombination method or recombination process can be used in determining the order or the distance between genes. Okay, I have also provided this in the handout. So for him, genes are arranged in a linear sequence on chromosomes. They are in the linear order, one after other they are present, and recombination frequency can be used in identifying their spacing or the gap or the distance between specific genes. So what is frequency? Frequency is the chance of two genes actually going together. Okay, so low frequency, low recombination frequency means, they are not being separated. They are very close. If two genes are very close to each other, as you see in the image like this. So you see this is chromosome 1. There is a gene 1 here, gene 2 here. There is not much spacing between them. So recombination frequency will be low for them. What does it mean? Recombination cannot separate them. The frequency of them being individually seen is very, very low because they're almost stuck. They're linked. We call them that they are linked. They are together. They're attached. They're not physically attached in a way, but they're very close to each other. If recombination happens with another chromosome like this, what happens? These both go together. Recombination cannot separate them. So low frequency of recombination refers to genes that are closely placed. And these genes are called linked genes. That is why it's called linkage mapping. They're linked because they're close. So distance has a connection. Distance has a negative or opposite effect on the recombination frequency. The closer they are, low frequency that you see. The distant they are, they can easily break apart. They can easily be separated during the recombination process. Okay, so if they're present close to each other like this, you can say that they are linked. Are they linked here? Two chromosomes, gene 1 is here, gene 2 here. Are they linked? Are they physically close to each other? No, they're not linked. They are not linked. The same manner, in this image, you see that on the same chromosome, one gene is here, another gene is here. This is also not linked because they have to be present close to each other. How close? Close enough that recombination frequency cannot break them, cannot separate them. This is a core concept. If you understand this, you'll be able to easily explain the concept behind linkage mapping.
Sir, if I'm not wrong, here frequency means the number of togetherness.
Opposite. The frequency means the number that depicts or that talks about how easily they can be separated. Okay, there are numbers. I'm going to give you numbers. It will become easy for you. So, but yes, as you're rightly thinking about this, I mean, you're in the right order. You're asking right questions related to that. So recombination means separation, switching. So frequency of recombination refers to not being together, but being away or being separated from each other. Because recombination, essence of recombination is to switch, move them. Correct? So recombination frequency means frequency at which they can be separated from each other. So linked will have more or larger or lower frequencies, higher frequencies or smaller frequencies if they are linked. What is the chance of splitting? High chance or low chance?
Low chance.
Low chance. So lower frequency.
Low.
So they tend to stay together. They don't get split much. If they split much, you will see higher numbers, higher frequencies for them. Okay, I'll explain that further. I'll show you an image. So I'll show you the numbers. I'll show you some formulas for this. You will understand it better. Just know the concept. If they're linked, they're close together, recombination frequency will be low. And if they're present on the same chromosome, very close to each other, they're linked. If they're present away from each other on the same chromosome, not linked, or they have higher chance of separation. And if they happen to be present on different chromosomes, of course, they're not linked. Correct? Clear cut scenario. So this is a concept behind creating linkage maps. I'll give you a little bit more on this. So what is recombination frequency? So this might help you understand what you're asking. So number of recombinants. So meaning number of products with different combinations per total number of progeny multiplied by 100. So it's a percentage of new varieties. If there are 100 of them, if 10 new combinations are seen, so recombination frequency is 10%. Correct?
Sir, what is progeny?
Progeny is children, babies. In genetics, progeny refers to babies or children. Total number of children, new varieties out of total number of children. If they have a new, like eye color is different, let's say. So you see the features, physical features, and you calculate that. And we have to somehow relate the recombination frequency to distance between genes, right? So this is what they do. If 1% of recombination frequency is seen, 1% of recombination frequency, that is equivalent to 1 unit or of distance between two genes. That unit is called centimorgan because his Studevant is Morgan's student. So recognizing Morgan's contribution, it is said centimorgan. This is the random units. It's like centimeter, but centimorgan. So 1 centimeter means they only have 1% recombination frequency, 2%, 4%, 8%, 10%. As they are separate from each other, the recombination frequency goes up. Okay. So like that, using this recombination frequency, a map is created to identify the order of those genes. I'll show you that. I'll give you a small question or a problem that you can use to answer this question.
Sir, if we have two infants and
To what?
two babies,
Right. Okay.
two babies, and number of, let's say, in a chromosome, we have A gene and a B gene. And similar same sequence is in the other child, which is A gene and a B gene. So it will be 50%. The recombination frequency.
No. So you're saying A, B genes are present in
Both the children.
both the children. There are only two children.
Only two children.
So all children have variation.
All children have A and B genes.
So it's not, yeah. So I think when you're referring to A and B, I think you're talking about different combinations. Am I right? New combinations.
Gene
A
combination.
and B.
Right.
A
Gene
is
combination.
Gene, so new gene combinations you're talking about. So there's 100% recombination, correct? So for that, I think we talked about some principles on this. You have to have enough number. It's a random chance. So you have to have few hundreds, at least few thousands of sample size to come up with these numbers.
So instead of AB, we can, if we have AB and CD, then
The thing is this, so if you're talking about this, ABCDs are multiple alleles of the same gene. Are you assuming so? Or ABCDs are different alleles for the same gene?
the same allele.
Same allele. It cannot be same allele, right? ABCDs are, you're naming them differently. There may be different alleles of the same gene, same character. They code for eye color, let's say. Brown color eye, blue color eyes, green color eyes, like that. Varieties. So let's say out of 100, 2 of them had blue color eyes, for example. If this is a new variety, you say 2 out of 100 have this. Correct. So 2% of them have, or this is a percentage for that. So you calculate it like that. I'll give an example for you to understand this. So look at this, okay? So forget about the, if I can, yeah, I'll let you write this, okay? So write down, I'll just, on the paper, you write down this information and see if you can solve the problem. If you really understood the concept, you can actually, pausing the share. Okay, write down this information. So recombination frequency between gene A and gene B. There are two genes, A, B. Okay, and they're on the order. You don't know the exact order, but they're A, B, C, Ds. Let's take 3 genes, A, B, C. Recombination frequency for A, B is 13.2%. Recombination frequency between A and B is 13.2%. And recombination frequency for B and C is 6%. 6%. So between A, B, 13%, between B and C, 6%, between A and C, it is 18%. Between A and C, it is 18%. Give me the order of these genes. You solve this problem, I'll explain, Sunil, to give you the concept of what had happened in recombination. So the question, the doubt you are asking, you will be clarified. You figure this out. So give me the order of genes, very simple. So you are given recombination frequency and for 3 different combinations of genes. Based on recombination frequency, identify the distance. What order are these genes present?
A, B, C.
ACB,
A, C, B.
B.
Okay, what makes you to think A, C, B?
The order of frequencies BC and AB are in the lowest.
The lowest is A, B and BC. What does that mean?
Means they are less chance of seeing them separately as compared to A and C.
So compared to the A and C, there's a less chance of seeing them separately, meaning they are closer.
Yeah.
Correct. Which is very close here? What is the closest of all three? A, B, C?
BC.
BC. So you write BC. BC must be close to each other. What about AC?
They're far.
They're far. So BC is close, but AC is far. A is far from C. Correct? But which side is A? Is it by the B or by the C? Is what you need to know. For that, you use the AB frequency. AB. How close are ABs? So let's put them in the centimorgans approximately. BC should have 6 centimorgan distance. BC should have 6 units, 6 centimorgan distance. And AB should have 13 centimorgan distance. And the distance between 18, is it matching? Can you match roughly? Because they won't be very accurate. So the order can be identified. You write both orders. Vishal, you said A, C, B. And Shweta, you said A, B, C. Sunil, what do you go with? Do you agree with one of them or do you have your own order?
ABC, sir.
ABC. Okay. What made you to think ABC? Shweta or Sunil, one of you? Can you prove that ACB is wrong and ABC is right?
So when we look towards the A and B frequency of recombination of A and B gene, it is 13.2%. And if we took A and C, it is 18%.
Correct. So can you place C away from B or do you have to place C next to B?
Away from A.
Away from A. You have to place it away from A, the farthest of
from A.
all. Where do you place B? Do you place B in the center or B towards the A or B after the C?
So
Because you only have so many possibilities there, right?
yes, sir.
Okay. So
So recombination frequency between B and C is 6%.
6%,
Means they are close.
they're close. But they can be close. They can be C or they can be CB. But given that AC distance is much higher,
Much
so
higher.
you place C after B. Okay, I'll show you this image. So Vishal, do you see?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
So A, B, C. So BC are close by 6.4. If you place C here, you cannot have this much of distance, this much of coverage, 13. And you place C here also, you are taking it away from the B. So first of all, you have to start with the BC and you utilize the largest RF, radio frequencies. So they must be, sorry, recombination frequencies. So they must be far from each other. So you first write A and C like this. Start with the A and C, A here, C here. Next question is, where do you put B? But you already know B has to be close to A and also close to C. So then you have to place it between the A and C. And approximately 13 plus 6 is actually more, 19, but approximately they match to this distance. So this is a very simple scenario. There are 3 genes like that. If you have 7, 8, 9, or 10 and more genes, it will be a bit difficult, but logically you can figure it out. And we used to have such lab works. So they used to give us these frequencies and figure out the orders. This used to be our lab exams for in genetics. But do you get the concept here? How recombination frequency can be used to measure the approximate distance or relative distance?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is what I want. This is what I want you to figure out. Right. So closer
But
they are,
there can also be a scenario.
they can also be.
There can also be a scenario where you are not confident where on which side it should fall.
So
Given that
enough,
we are given only 2.
yes, you have to have enough recombinations. You have to have enough combinations that you can check. So higher the number of those sequences you can look for, better the confidence. And coming to your question that you asked, so it's not about A, B, C, Ds. There are, genes are present, like let's say all alphabets you write together, A, B, C, D, E. So what you're learning here in individuals, you watch in individuals, if BC is always together, in all individuals, BCs are together, then 0% of recombination frequency for the BC location. Or out of 10 people, one of them had just B, another one had just C, means it got split. So 10% of chance of recombination frequency, like that you calculate. If these genes are always found together, or if there is a presence of them individually, meaning they're separated from each other, you calculate those numbers. So when I say new combinations, I mean whether they are able to split or not. If B and C is always together in everyone, or B is seen individually, C is seen individually. In this case, A and C can be seen more, separately in different individuals. So some may have A, some may have C, but less chance of that happening with BC. So this is telling us BC must be close and recombination is not separating it. But A and C must be far enough, relatively. Then maybe let's say I'll talk to you about D. Let's say D is here and E is here, and showing the distance of let's say 22% of frequency and relative frequency, very close to C, medium, moderately close to B, and again close to A. So like that, you have to build step by step the order of that. That is how Sturtevant actually created genetic map for Drosophila genes. Okay, and of course we're talking about Drosophila, but this is anthropology class, so we must have an example from humans as well. Is this method suitable for humans? Has any genetic map been created for humans using this method? Okay, let's talk about that next. So linkage mapping in humans. So concept is same. I'm not going to go through the same concept. So relative order, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. So same story. If they are close by, like E and F, for example, B and C, or A and B. So which one is easy, or recombination frequency will be low for which of them, and the distance. This is the same concept. The closer two genes are, the more likely they are to be inherited together. So they don't get separated. So they will be together. So, but how do you calculate these numbers? How easy it is to actually identify the positions of the chromosomes in humans? That will be difficult. So what do they have to do? They have to work on pedigree charts or family histories for this. They use pedigree studies, and only for specific genes where phenotype can be seen. Let's hemophilia. How many of your family members have hemophilia? How many of your family members have the other disease for which the gene responsible for this is close by? So only through family history you can construct a rough genetic map. Because with humans, you cannot perform studies as you do with Drosophila. Sturtevant might have actually dissected some Drosophilas, or he probably had looked for some phenotypes by growing them in bulk, but we cannot do that with humans. For the existing population, for the existing information, you have to come up with an idea. So using pedigrees, family histories, they have created an approximate genetic map for few chromosomes using recombinant frequencies to roughly estimate using the available pedigree data, available family history. But it is very, very difficult to perform with humans, and very few linkage maps have been identified using this method. But it had been done. But few linkage maps have been done because we don't have that clear understanding or clear information that we can use to construct a linkage map. It is difficult. Okay, this is how first human genome map had been created using this method. This is the most traditional method in this, but using family histories or pedigrees. Okay, you explain this and briefly mention that it is difficult. Not enough can be done with this type of method for human genome maps, given the limited information that we can get through the pedigrees.
Sir, will you be sharing these slides today?
Yeah, if you want, just make a note of because I've given summary of this. If you want, I'll show you what I have done in the handout for this. Okay, this is just to provide you an idea. If you want, if you think this helps, I will definitely do that. But I've given a good summary on these things. One second. Genome mapping. Yeah. Yeah, so see this. So I've created information like this. So what is gene mapping and what has been done by Alfred Sturtevant and linkage mapping. Okay, so by finding out how often various characteristics are inherited together, it is possible to estimate the distance between the genes. This is called linkage map. If the genes are close enough, they're said to be linked, and the linkage distance can be used to measure the approximate distance in them. So only thing that you put the map like I was showing you, A, B, C, D, like that. So the example that we have seen, so the problem that you worked on, so you can show a map something like that, and thereby creating the first human genome map. And here, where is the information coming from? Information coming from the family histories or family pedigrees. So this is how much you need to write, and write a brief diagram related to that. Okay. And write about the limitation. Recombination frequencies through the family histories would be very limited. So this is has a limited use in humans, but this has been done.
All the handouts that are shared with us, so each one of them has something for us, like because they are like long enough. Do we need to go through all of them?
Come again, each of the handouts shared with you.
Sir, in the group, some of the handouts were shared.
Yes. Yeah.
So, do we need to go through all of them because some are long enough? I mean,
So some are actually, you mean they're lengthy.
Do they have anything new that we did not discuss in the class? Or
No, I think the class, what I do, I mostly focus on explaining the concept. But for the writing part, if you need a idea about making sentences or showing some extensive discussion that you have to do, they're more descriptive in nature, basically. So here I focus mostly on the explanation part, diagrams. And most of the times they go together, unless I'm giving some external reading material for you. The concepts I've explained are described in that. So majority of them that you see that I've collected them or I've summarized them. So they should explain what we are talking about. Like for example, here you only understood the concept by drawing the diagram. But what do you write? What sentences do you write for that? Those sentences are part of the handouts. Okay, go through them, you will understand how they are useful to you. Okay, rather than going through, like pick up Peanut book and read, you will understand the difference. The same topic, you actually go through Peanut book and see if Peanut is better or the handouts that I'm giving you are better. And many students in the market, physical anthropology means Peanut. So you'll appreciate the amount, the material that we are getting here, the handouts I'm giving you, how different they are from Peanut. Because I myself suffered from reading those type of books during my BSc, and I prefer not to read them. Because we used to have something called BD Singh. Those books are like guides. They take material from everywhere and dump them, and you lose the logic. Okay, go through them because many of them have, they are students. I think you heard one student in the class who talked about the importance of that. And there's one guy, Nishant, he actually wrote the exam yesterday. And he said he didn't read anything outside what is given in the class, what is given to him as handouts, which I don't recommend because you have to also, every teachers have their own limitations, right? So it's nothing wrong in seeing what's been given outside the classes. If you find them useful, if they give you different case studies, use them. I don't want you to just limit yourself to this, but they should provide you a very good, structure for organizing your information and writing them in the exam. So, and I definitely say that the handouts I'm giving it to you, I think you must read them. Really, if you want to extract or utilize them to the fullest, you have to read them. And you know what? Sometimes I feel I'm giving actually very little. So if you ignore them, and that will be.
so sir, if that's the case, please give us because to be frank, I haven't like focused on and physical part of it. I'm currently focusing on cultural, but I have to start because there's a test coming up, and yeah, because that is important, I feel.
Definitely. And moreover, you know what happens? There are many volatile concepts we're talking in the class. So I heard from many students, if let's say that you just listen to my classes, haven't done much, haven't read, and you wrote prelims and you want to study them before the mains part, you find them too hard to understand because they're so volatile. These connections will be gone. Even for us as teachers, even after teaching multiple times, we get stuck in some ideas. Okay, and you have bet more challenge than us because for us we can look up one topic and teach you, but in the exam you have to write answers for many of those topics, so you have to do more work than us. Correct. So it is very important that you revisit these concepts multiple times. They're not easy. Physical anthropology part is difficult, complex, not something your brain can easily figure out. So it's very important that you understand, revise, and read in the handouts. These three has to be done before you finish the classes. So make sure that you give one complete read of all the handouts and revise at least once or twice what we discussed in the class. Then you can get the maximum benefit from this when you revise it. Otherwise, 60-70% of it is gone when you are retouching it after prelims. Then you literally starting to freak out. Okay, don't do that. And wherever, even after reading, after sometimes you get stuck, you can send me a message. I'll help you with that. Okay, right. Moving on. So we'll talk about other components here.
So can we
Dog is asking a question.
So some guests are at home, so she wants to go and smell them.
Okay. Yeah, that's all. Go ahead.
So I was wondering if we can kind of close the class today. At least I am not able to follow beyond that. Not sure about the others.
Yeah, I know this is feeling a little heavy today.
Yeah, I'm feeling very heavy today, sir.
Yeah, we can do that. Not a problem. Yes, because I think we need a bit more focus. We are coming up with more physical mapping, fish mapping. They require a bit more understanding. We can do that. So I can continue this in next class. Okay, I'll do one thing. I'll actually send you the handout for this. See if you can go with it, read it once before coming to the class. If you found it too complex, then don't worry. Just wait for me to teach it. Okay, and 2 topics. This is one, and the genome sequencing should be a bit easier. So hopefully in the next class, I think at least I want to finish this off: gene mapping and genome sequencing studies and genetic imprinting. That is also slightly complex topic. So we need to focus a bit more on the next class, okay, because of the complex topics like this. But these are the little complex ones. So I'll send the handouts for both of them. Okay, read it before the next class. I think I may not be able to take the next class. So most likely we'll have a class day after. So you will have a time tomorrow. I'll send you the handouts for the next topics as well, along with the genetic counseling. But counseling screening should be easier. But that gene mapping and genome sequencing, as well as the imprinting, that you have to read, focus more. Okay, right. So good. So I will send this handouts right away. So read it before the next class. So the day after we'll have the class. So read this before the class and day after tomorrow. Okay, great. Right.
Thank you, guys.
I think your dog is also thanking us.
No, she's not thanking. There are some new people. Unless she goes and smells them, she can't kind of.
So it is not comfortable basically.
She has to go. Some new smells have come. She's a beagle, so she has a very high sense of smell.
High sensitivity.
Yeah.
The receptors are high, or more number of receptors in her nose. Right. Okay, guys. Have a good evening. Yeah.
Thank you.